no little old lady in Omaha ever said, "I'm sorry, Mildred, I can't play bridge with you tonight because I have to watch LeBron." A million little old ladies in Omaha said that about Michael Jordan.
Bob, you have been up close covering every great in American sports through the past 5 decades. And there have been some greats, and they're all ultra competitive, and they're all relentless workers. So what is it about Michael Jordan that stood out to you as different?
I think it's the combination of everything: the unquestioned excellence, the objective greatness, but then the fact that he was so beautiful to watch. Magnetism and presence and star power. Michael Jordan had that to an 11 on a 10 scale. And even though people will mutter forever about Jerry Krause breaking up this team, I think it actually enhances Jordan's mystique and legend, because we never saw him lose. The Wizards don't count. That's less than a footnote. He walks away on top. If he had come back, eventually they would have lost at some point. And the last image would have been him walking off the court in defeat. Now the last image is the greatest closing act in the history of American sports, at least the sports that I have followed. Ted Williams hit a home run in his last time at bat, but it wasn't in the World Series, wasn't even on national television. 10,000 people on a dark, dank day at Fenway Park. Everybody saw this. This is still the highest rated game in NBA history. I don't know what more you could ask of somebody.
Well, as someone who grew up in the D.C. area, I'm saying the Wizards count, but I get what you mean.
Well, when he came back, here's the part that's amazing. Was he that Michael Jordan? No. Was he still a really good player, capable of some big-time performances? Yep.
Patrick Ewing recently told me a story about how he was on the phone with Michael Jordan, and Patrick's first grade son wandered over and said, "Is that the guy on my shirt?" Do you think that before this Last Dance series, some of the legend of Michael Jordan was fading to the sands of time? And how do you think this series will set that clock back?
I think to younger fans, a real-time recollection of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. It's Kobe. It's LeBron for them. And understandably so. That's part of the beauty of sports. Time moves on. But this certainly has done nothing to diminish Jordan's standing. I think, if anything, Jordan has moved up, if that's possible, because this showed not only his artistry, but it showed his humanity, at least in part. And the people who think that somebody has to be a two-dimensional figure off a Wheaties box in order to be a sports hero, that's so yesterday. I found some of this interesting. I think he's a textured person. That makes him more interesting. Some of it was actually endearing. His feelings about his family, especially about his dad. And when he talked about his ethos, this is the way you want to play. This is the way we want to play if you want to play with me. And he got choked up. I think that made him more likable. So if anything, he moves higher. It might not have seemed possible, but in my view, he moves higher after all this.
And it's so interesting you say that. We saw several times during this documentary that there was a price to being Michael Jordan. What did you see along the way as the biggest cost to him of all of that greatness?
Privacy, and a chance to just gather his thoughts. And what I observed was that he understood what his responsibility to his team, to the league, to the game was. Parenthetically, in one of the earlier episodes, he said a lot of players don't love the game as much as they love what the game provides. That's a really thoughtful insight. He does love the game. In fact, after that last game in Salt Lake City, as Doug Collins and Isaiah and I were signing off, I said, you know what? Of course, he's the most hyped athlete of our time, and the riches are there and all the adulation and all the marketing. But if you put this guy in an empty gym with Bill Russell, Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Dr. J, he'd be in his element, and they would immediately know that he was one of them. He understood who he was.
Where does Jordan rank in terms of athletes that you have witnessed, interviewed, mentioned, talked to, in terms of greatness? And I know that that is something that is defined objectively or subjectively, however you want to put it. But where does Michael rank for you, Bob?
Having heard this question debated so many times and having had it put to me now so many times, here's what I've settled upon. I can't put anybody ahead of him. I know you can make a good case for others. You can make just as good a case and maybe slightly better for Michael Jordan. So if forced to choose among team sport athletes I've seen, taken into account all the aspects of it, championships won, individual honors, presence, impact on the game, all those things. If I was forced to pick, I'd pick Michael Jordan, but I have respect for the other names that make their way into the argument. I wasn't an adult, but I saw Willie Mays play a lot of baseball. Hard to imagine a greater all-round baseball player than Willie Mays. Hard to imagine anybody being more of a master of their sport than Wayne Gretzky was in a hockey rink, what Tiger Woods was as a golfer during that several years when he was absolutely in his prime. So I'm not slighting anybody else. Jim Brown, like Jordan, left at the peak, but you didn't have the same kind of coverage and marketing and everything else. I'm not slighting anybody else. I'm just saying that it isn't just the popularity and the attention and the marketing that make Michael Jordan at the peak of that argument, or at least tied for first. It's his actual qualities and accomplishments as an athlete, even if it happened in a vacuum.
Hey, you
LeBron
watched
James becoming the all-time leading scorer in NBA history. Can you put that in some historical context? What does that record mean?
Well, it means a hell of a lot, especially because of the guy who held it, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's one of the greatest players in history. Almost by definition, you hold a record like that, you have to be among the greatest players in history. Is it another feather in LeBron's cap? It most certainly is. But by way of comparison, LeBron has won one season scoring title. Kareem won a handful. Michael Jordan won 10. Michael Jordan averaged 30.1 points a game for his career, exactly the same as Wilt Chamberlain. They're the two tops in that category. LeBron's points per game, actually at this advanced stage of late, he's averaging 30-plus points a game. But he hasn't scored at the same clip that Jordan did, but he has more rebounds,
and more
he has
assists.
more assists. He is a tremendous player. As he's said himself, he could play any position on the court. If he had to, he could play center. He could certainly play the 3, the 4, the 1. LeBron broke Kareem's record. The final score was 133 to 130. That's not terribly atypical these days. It would be very atypical in Jordan's era. The last game that Michael Jordan played, perhaps his most famous game, when he made the classic shot,
which you
to turn
called,
the 1-point deficit into a 1-point championship win over the Jazz. Final score is 87 to 86. Michael Jordan scored 45 points. So proportionately, that's a different achievement. That doesn't clinch the argument, but there's a little bit of apples and oranges going on here because the circumstances are very different.
But does LeBron breaking this record change your view at all about Michael Jordan being the greatest ever?
No, I think it's another notch on the resume for LeBron, and he was already on the very short list of the greatest players who ever played in any era. But I've always said this, though, and this has nothing to do with a statistical comparison. If we're just talking about basketball in a vacuum, you've got a LeBron-Jordan argument, and cases can be made for either. But if you're talking about the overall impact, through no fault of LeBron's, that's Jordan in a runaway. Michael Jordan's impact on the game and on its popularity has something to do not only with his excellence, but his presence. He was an incredibly pleasing and compelling player to watch. Not that LeBron isn't, but there are degrees of things. And Jordan was at the highest level, occupied by only a very few in the history of sports, any sport. And I've taken to saying it this way. No little old lady in Omaha ever said, I'm sorry, Mildred, I can't play bridge with you tonight because I have to watch LeBron. A million little old ladies in Omaha said that about Michael Jordan. They didn't know, a three-pointer from a pick and roll. Part of that has to do with the way the game was televised. Leave me out of it. I was just a lucky bystander. But the NBA was on CBS during the Johnson-Bird era, and during the Jordan era, which blended over into the Shaq-Kobe era, it's on NBC. Not only are the games on NBC, when the broadcast landscape was different, when being on a network really mattered, But the promos are on Seinfeld and Cosby and ER and Friends and David Letterman and Johnny Carson and Tom Brokaw's newscast and the Today Show. It's in the cultural water supply. The Dream Team, the first and real Dream Team in Barcelona, is part of that. You think not just of Jordan, but the whole constellation of stars in the NBA then. It was just more central, and the ratings reflect that. And it has nothing to do with how great LeBron is or how great and wonderful to watch Steph Curry is. The cultural impact of Michael Jordan and the NBA itself was greater then than it is now.
And of course, there were so many fewer channels. There wasn't,
That's right.
There wasn't this.
That's right.
And all the other distractions that come with it as well.
This is with us now. He has watched Michael Jordan from the very beginning. There's a whole other side of this, which is a financial consideration. This man was the marquee for professional basketball. This network is one of the beneficiaries. What's going to happen to the whole phenomenal rise in popularity of professional basketball without Michael Jordan?
Put it in some perspective. Nearly a decade ago, Tom, the NBA had its finals on tape delay at midnight as Magic Johnson was leading them to their first title, the Lakers to their first title in 1980. In the next decade, with Bird and Johnson and then Michael Jordan, the NBA reached a zenith. I think it's at a state of overall health that it's never going to regress back to those earlier days. It'll always be healthy. But the glory era is over because no sport has ever had arguably the three greatest players in its history as contemporaries, all on national television at the same time. 13 of the last 14 NBA finals have had the Celtics, the Lakers, or the Bulls in them, meaning Bird, Johnson, Jordan. That can never happen again.
Again, the Larry Johnsons, the Shaquille O'Neals of the world, and the new stars coming along.
Charles Barkley.
Will they replace Michael Jordan? Because nobody had the kind of physical attributes that he did, the athleticism.
They will not replace him, but the league is on sure footing, and they do have a second tier of stars. But to lose Bird, Johnson, Jordan, all in the space of a year and a half, if not devastating, it certainly has an impact.
Do you think he'll come back to basketball in any way, shape, or form? He seemed to keep the door open today, didn't he?
I think there's a very good chance that this is a sabbatical rather than a permanent retirement, and he deserves that sabbatical considering the professional and personal pressures and circumstances of the last year plus.
Is that what he meant when he said he wasn't sort of giving up basketball altogether?
Hard to say.
It was a discussion, pardon me, about the whole history of sports. So even then, Michael Jordan, had he never played another game, was in the conversation as among the most significant athletes in American sports history, because that's what we were comparing him to.
What about the element of Jordan's competitiveness, right? Like, it was your voice last night who pointed out, that there was a lot of people at the time, and I saw some of it kind of downplayed on social media in terms of Clyde Drexler's rise. But I'm sitting here looking at the Sports Illustrated that has Clyde on the cover, where there was a question: who's better, Clyde or Michael Jordan? Magic said, look, I went into his house the night before, and he said, I got something for this guy. What was that like to be a part of, to watch Jordan line up whoever the enemy was or the created enemy was and take him out time and again?
Doug, this is not an original observation on my part. It's been said thousands of times because apparently it's true. He would take an actual slight and he would magnify it many times over. But he also could create an imaginary slight and use that as motivation. Clyde Drexler is one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. He's gracious and he's classy. He doesn't blow his own horn. He was a wonderful player. And coincidentally, Jordan's teammate only, a month and a half later on the Dream Team after they met in the finals in 1992. There were a lot of people saying during that 92 final between the Trailblazers and the Bulls that Drexler was the second best player in the game. I don't remember, maybe you do, but I don't remember anyone really contending that he had overtaken or pulled even with Michael, but that he was number two. But that was enough. That was enough. Michael, in his head, didn't just want to win. He wanted to win like Secretariat in the Belmont, so that whoever was second was closer to last than they were to him. So even the notion that somebody might be moving up a little bit closer to him was enough to fuel him. And Drexler had an uneven final. He did have a couple of good games, as I remember. And I recall that one of the games in Portland, our opening, before we came on the air live, our produced opening was all about Clyde Drexler and all about how the expectations, he has to be aware of them, even though he wears it lightly, and we had shots of him smiling and joking with his teammates, but that there's a different kind of focus on him now than there was even at Houston, where he was a collegiate star, or earlier in his career with the Trailblazers. This is different, and his team is looking to him to rise
very high. And when you see through the rearview mirror how that decade of Bulls dominance resonates, it has everything. It's a great team, one of the great dynasties in the history of American sports. It's got a great supporting cast of interesting and vivid characters, Jackson, Rodman, Pippen, even Reinsdorf and Krause. In that era in the NBA, you had some tremendous teams that just hit their stride at the wrong time because Michael denied them championships. When you think of the constellation of stars, just think of the roster of the Dream Team and the constellation of stars in the NBA in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So it's a rich and vivid story, but at the center of it, you've got a leading man that is an 11 on a 10 scale. He's everything. He's great. He's interesting as a personality. He's beautiful to watch as a player. He's extraordinarily intelligent and aware. So when he expresses himself, you're not just getting cliched sound bites, you're getting interesting stuff. I've said this many times, forgive me if some of your audience has heard it, the difference between then and now, and that last game, that game 6 in 1998 against the Jazz, is still the highest rated NBA game in history. The difference is that sports fans say, I'm going to watch LeBron James and the Cavs or the Heat or the Lakers, whoever he was with. Actually, it makes a difference that Michael was only with one team. It makes a difference that Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were only with one team. This is a different era in sports. But little old ladies from Omaha who wouldn't know a pick and roll from a three-pointer wanted to watch Michael Jordan. They might not even have known.
I've always thought the three best basketball players I've seen in my life were Michael, number 1, LeBron, 2, Magic, 3. And, you know, I'm in the opinion space where it's a list-driven, opinion-driven proposition on most days. I want you to go back to your career and just the archival ability you have, your encyclopedic mind on baseball, obviously, but to basketball. I always thought the gap between Michael and Magic, because Magic's ability to elevate others, was a tad closer than he was given credit for. Go to the prime of both of their careers, which you broadcast. Maybe my recollection is poor. Was the gap between Michael and Magic Laurel Canyon or Grand Canyon? How big was it?
I'm going to go with Laurel Canyon, and that takes nothing away from Michael Jordan. I am in agreement with the consensus that all things considered, you got to put centers, I think, in a different category.
Yes.
I don't know how you compare Wilt or Kareem or a healthy Bill Walton or et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how you compare them to guards and forwards. But all things considered, I would say that Michael Jordan was the best. But he peaked during a time of branding and marketing and booming. Larry and Michael, and to a lesser extent, Dr. J may have started it. Larry and Magic, I meant. And Dr. J may have started it, but it really peaked during the 90s. So he came to prominence and did what he did, which was magnificent, at a time when all of it was amplified globally. The Dream Team, Nike, all that stuff. And so, especially for younger viewers, he became the guy. That doesn't mean he wasn't the guy, but to your point, he wasn't that much better. Was he better? Yeah, give him the edge. But he wasn't that much better than Magic Johnson. He wasn't that much better than Larry Bird. Was he the best? Yes, in my opinion, he was. But it wasn't like Secretariat in the Belmont, where the guy who's second was closer to, for the horse at second, closer to 10th than to Secretariat.
All right, 2 more questions.
Well, for Bulls fans, there is, of course, cause for celebration tonight after a 6th championship that came harder than the others. But there's some anxiousness mixed in as well. Who knows how all of this will play out, but it's certainly possible that tonight we saw the last of the Chicago Bulls as we have known them. And whether it ends here or sometime in the near future, it'll be noteworthy not just for the breakup of one of the great teams in sports history, but because given the present structure of pro sports, it may be quite a while before we see anything like this again. Oh, the organizations that have the resources, the Yankees, the Braves, the Cowboys, the Lakers, and the NBA, will almost always field contending teams. But the days of continuity may be ending. Even on the best teams, there's now so much turnover that it's becoming ever harder to follow and identify with teams. Loyalty has been fragmented, which brings us to an underappreciated aspect of this golden era in the NBA. It hasn't just been Bird, Magic, and Michael. It was the whole recognizable cast of characters around them that gave the Celtics, the Lakers, and the Bulls their texture and made following them all the more interesting. Even the Jazz, noble runners-up 2 years in a row, are personified by the longest tenured coach in the league and two Hall of Famers who have been teammates for well over a decade. We'll see championship teams in the future, but will we see teams that endure this way? And as for Michael Jordan, all the superlatives have been exhausted and almost all apply. But perhaps the most important one is this: he's authentic. His essence is so much deeper than image. In fact, the image is, in his case, an amplification of something true and substantive. Take all the money, all the adulation, all the TV cameras away, and put Michael Jordan in a gym somewhere with Russell and Oscar, West and the Doctor, and he is genuine and as much in his element as any of them. His heart and his athletic integrity every bit as impressive as his artistry. So whenever it ends, it's been an incredible ride for Jordan and the Bulls, and we at NBC have been privileged to be taken along for that ride. So as we say goodnight, we'd like to acknowledge the work of all the people who made these telecasts possible. For everyone at NBC Sports, good night from Salt Lake City. So we'll stay with Larry Bird right now. One similarity, I guess there are many, but one that strikes me between you and Michael Jordan, Larry, is that killer instinct, totally ruthless on the court. You had that, and Michael does too.
Well, that's awful nice, Bob, comparing me to Michael Jordan.
Larry, were you able to intimidate Michael Jordan at all early in his career?
I don't know. I never really said much to Michael. I hear all these things that people say, but I was a competitor. I played hard against the great players. Michael was a great player, and I just tried to do the best I could against him. I didn't have the athletic skills that Michael has. I couldn't jump as high or run as fast, but I had to make it up in other areas. And at times I did well, and other times I didn't do as well as I like to. But overall, I had a good career, and I'm very pleased with the way things went.
Julius, one thing for sure, you had Larry and Magic to test yourselves against. There's nothing comparable to that quality of competition at the top for these Chicago Bulls. Through no fault of their own, they don't have the Celtics and the Lakers like you did.
Well, they don't have a steady diet of those two teams, but certainly they have Orlando, they have the New York Knicks, the Indiana Pacers, and you can't say little about the Houston Rockets, you know, as being a cupcake team. They're a very, very good basketball team.
12-1 through the playoffs. Let's see if we can hook up with Magic now. Magic, your thoughts on this particular Bulls team? You played against the first Bulls champion in 1991, but this Bulls team, where does it rank?
Well, I think they're definitely one of the best teams of all time in basketball, only because they can go out and full court press you and really defense denying you, taking you out of your offense. So they're definitely one of the best teams of all time.
If you were born past the year 2000, then you probably don't know who Bob Costas is. But for myself, I was born in 1984. I grew up in the 90s, the greatest era, the golden era of everything from basketball, football, boxing, you know, rap music, R&B music, reggae, dancehall, all types of music, everything, okay? Movies. Bob Costas, all right, was in that corner of being that GOAT or golden voice of basketball. Okay, he called Michael Jordan's biggest games. He called Michael Jordan's most iconic games. All right, and he called the shot heard around the world, Michael Jordan's last shot on the Bulls, game winner. He was the one calling it, and he also, you know, gave a monologue at the end talking about Jordan. So, so the greatness, all right, that emanates from this this guy, Bob Costas, you guys have no clue. You need to do a study on Bob Costas because he had at least 40 years in the game. Right now, I think he does a little baseball, or he did a few years ago. Right, I think he slipped off a little bit off of this thing, but Anyhow, he is one of the greatest broadcasters of all time. I'm not talking about Stephen A. Smith type. I'm talking about Stuart Scott type. Okay? So, say that to say, when he talks about the GOAT debate, talks about Michael Jordan, talks about LeBron James, he has knowledge, dating back 30, 40 years. First-hand knowledge of all the greats. Okay, so we can take his word if he says that Michael Jordan is that guy. Okay, I mean, when it comes to stats, okay, LeBron James, put him up there. He knows how to get his stats. He knows the little tricks. All right, he'll keep himself in the game longer. He knows all sorts of things. All right, he gets his assists, rebounds, and all of that. Right, sometimes even in meaningless games or meaningless spots. Right, but it comes to winning. It's Michael Jordan. And that's bar none. Okay, there's nobody else near him. Right? We can put Kobe up there, but we're putting Michael Jordan up there, number one. Right? And I don't want to hear nothing about LeBron. Okay? From none of you guys. And as evidence, Bob Costas, he's showing you that MJ is that dude. They dominated the whole 90s when it was the most physical form of basketball. So what do you expect? If he had played today, maybe he'd average 40 to 50 points a game. Okay? So I just want to let you guys see these clips, okay, of Bob Costas showing you, telling you how MJ is that GOAT. All right? And there's nobody else who can contest him in this sport. And that's about it. So until next time.